Hello.
Nels Cline.
Yes, hello.
Welcome to the Truth About Vintage Amps podcast.
Why, thank you. How are you guys?
We're good.
Fantastic. I'm honored. This is Skip speaking now. I'm honored. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, I hope that Jason has warned you that I know nothing about amps, and that I've even uttered the phrase more than once, "Oh, I'm over amps." But the reason I say this is primarily because when playing my own music, in other words, not touring with Wilco, I can't bring an amp. So I basically have to do amp du jour, which can be a challenge, but in a way, maybe it's an honorable challenge.
Well, that's a fantastic first question. So what you're saying is when you're touring, you just never really know what you're going to get, and so you constantly have to adapt right then on the spot to do the best you can with what you have, which kind of has turned you off of the amp world.
Well, it hasn't really turned me off of amp world. I'll explain further. For one thing, I do have an equipment rider. It just doesn't always get met. It doesn't always get taken care of. But it's right now the amp that I always ask for is the same thing that I'm sure when my friends Bill Frisell or Julian Lodge or these guys are touring, they just ask for that blackface, quote unquote, reissue that's not a reissue Fender Deluxe Reverb 1x12 combo. And that usually does the trick in spite of the fact that it's certainly not an award-winning amplifier, and that they're, for a factory hammered together amp, they are rather inconsistent tonally, from my perspective anyway. Sometimes you get a good one, but in the older days, before I had an equipment rider that made any impact on the world, it was pretty interesting to grapple, as we would say, possibly, with some of the offerings that I had. I think the biggest challenge for me is always an amplifier that has no available clean tone. And that doesn't happen very often, but for some reason, the amp that always had the worst, growliest tone in my past experience, this is more 90s we're talking about, was a Silverface Twin. Why a Twin with all that power would have no headroom and no tone? I never understood it, but it seems like the poor Silverface Twins never got maintained, and as such would just have this mashed potato tone that was super unappealing and impossible to work around. Also, the Marshall acoustic, solid-state acoustic amp, that was a toughie. Do you remember those? They were brown, like maybe a 110 or something. Anyway.
Well, let me just point out that you started with being off of amps, and now we've had just like 5 or 10 minutes of some good insight on amps from a guy that's been there. I agree with you. If it's a Silverface Twin and the master volume's turned up all the way, you'd love it if it was working. But they worked for so long that no one ever took care of them, and they could be running on 2 tubes or 3 tubes instead of 4, and no one would know.
Right. I have a story for you, though, Skip. I have a Silverface story. It's like the one place in the world where I saw more Silverface Fender amps that were in use or had been in use was in Hawaii, in Honolulu. I played a show in Don Ho's former tiki hut where they were doing catamaran, like we had a big catamaran in the ceiling, and they were doing some kind of not highlight, what am I thinking of? They were doing shows for tourists, and they had this, Hawaiian fabric behind us. I was there to play Stooges covers with Mike Watt and Stephen Perkins. I was subbing for Pete DiStefano in in what was Hell Ride. I was also in another Mike Watt Studious band called The Real Ohmme. But anyway, behind that Hawaiian-style fabric, for literally the entire back and side of this stage, was 2 layers, like there's a shelf. So on stage level, and then another level above that on a shelf, just nothing but silver face Fender amps. Like everyone, it's like they had bought them all at once in the 70s or late 60s, and that was it. It never changed. So they had everything. They had the Pro Reverb, they had a Bassman, they had a Twin, it was just like a wall of Silverface amps. Didn't get to use any of them though. I think I played through some rented Marshall so I could be super rock that night.
Well, they had the whole casinos. There was a sale a decade back ago in Reno where one of the big John Esquagas or something, and they had 100 Silverface amps that a lot of people bought. And
wow.
They didn't take care of them either, right? Our friend Little Charlie Baby played there. Yeah, they just try that one, kick this one, and try to get it to work. And that's why some guys I know just went through all the hassle of packing their own blackface super reverb, in this case, wherever they went, no matter what, and a backup.
Well, that makes sense. Don't you think that super reverb people are a very special breed? It's like very hard once you get the super reverb person to get him or her or they or whatever away from that vibe. I was never a tens guy, so yeah, I find tens a little challenging. I'm a 12s type dude, and 112 usually does the trick, but I'm into really simple amps with minimal treble and rich low mids. And headroom, so I have a nice clean tone as my template to work from, and that's it. So I can even play a Polytone Mini Brute and not be tormented.
Well, they sound good, but no one can fix them. But if you're at home and you're looking for something, if you're just looking for a groove and you grab an electric guitar, what are you likely to plug it into? And then the next question is obviously that rig can't be taken out and duplicated night after night in big rooms, apparently, very easily. So what would that be when you're looking for fun?
Right here where my wife and our dog and I are living temporarily, we had to move out of our apartment in Brooklyn. All I have here is little stuff.
What if you walked into a monstrous studio? What if you had anything? What if you had your new pad with your new little jam room, and you could have whatever? what would you want to plug into first? Like some little Tweed amp or a boutique amp, a Princeton Reverb, something like that?
Oh, Princeton Reverb. If I don't have to play loud, a Princeton Reverb will always do the job. I have a Milkman amp in Chicago in the Wilco loft. That's a kind of they gave it a little extra headroom for me, but that and I have a high wattage rated speaker, so the speaker doesn't break up. It's like a 50 watt rated Jupiter speaker. And that amp, one of the greatest recording amps I've ever experienced. It's gorgeous. But, I use these little Studious amps by this guy in Chicago, and they're just super simple, just treble, bass, and volume, and a good warm tone. And 20 watts takes her away, or sometimes 15. On stage with Wilco and playing a 20 watt amplifier, but with 212. The Studious Mosley. Actually, Jason knows I have this Webcore, projector, movie projector.
I know what those are. I can tell you what that is. I've had a few.
So I love this thing. Just so you know, I got it at Willie's American Guitars in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I wasn't there to buy an amp. I was there just goofing off because Wilco was doing a 3-night run, and I was just playing through this amp, and I know that Nate at Willie's had a nefarious plan when he selected this amp for me to just try out guitars through, because of course I ended up saying, what is this thing? Because I just really like the sound. No tone knob, and it's not delicate, which is nice.
Well, I can tell you what that is if you want to know, and I could even tell you why you like it.
Please do.
It's a powered monitor tube. Our speakers could look up the web. It's a 166 is what that thing's called, and it went with a fancy reel-to-reel, a mid-level, not quite Ampex, but a good quality home reel-to-reel rig from the 50s could have included that thing. But it also has a microphone input on it. They thought you could narrate, your home movies with that. Then to go to the next step, if you learn, some of our fiends have learned to read schematics, which I've encouraged. That's simple stuff. And if you could look at that schematic, and you could look at, say, a Tweed Deluxe, you'd go, wow, this and this and this and this is all exactly the same, or really, really close. It's a good amp, right? And that's why you like it. And they usually have a decent speaker in them, and that guy just sets you up. Somebody probably got in there and replaced a few parts, but they don't need a ton of modifications or anything. They just sound good. And I would say there's a lot of old junk like that. That's how the PA heads I do a lot got popular because of that. If you've never heard anything but a reissue Deluxe reverb, you plug into some old thing from the 50s that's just made for microphones, and you just go, oh, now we're talking. And this guy loves gear and amps.
I know. I thought we were just going to talk about El Pato for a half hour.
Oh, we have to get to that. But I wanted to actually torment Skip, possibly.
Sure.
By also telling him that another amp that I use as, like, if I just have to try out a pedal that just came my way, because I don't plug in to practice. So then I have to set up an amp really quickly and plug in a pedal and figure out what it sounds like. I use my little ZT Lunchbox amp, made in China, solid state, and it's kind of this super bland but serviceable sort of sonic template that has almost no coloration unless you turn up the gain or turn the tone up or whatever. And so I can just use that. It's kind of really like a monitor in its own sort of transparent way, I guess. Sorry, I didn't mean to use the word transparent. What I meant was in its own humble way, because it's not transparent. What the hell does that mean? It's the most meaningless word that people toss around, and I just used it. Sorry.
You can do whatever you want.
You can.
And I have comments on this topic. So whenever you wind down, I've already got 2 or 3 comments.
Well, wait, before you get to yours, Skip, Nels, finish what's at home, and then recap what do you actually take out on the road back in the old days when you could play with Wilco?
Oh, okay. Well, what I have at home right now is the aforementioned Webcore 166. You say, Skip?
I believe that's what the model number is, or 66. 166.
Okay,
yeah,
I hope it's 66. That's one of my favorite numbers. And I have my little Studious Cellier, which is a 14-watt, 112, just tone and volume combo. It's beautiful. Excellent. It's an aromatic cedar cabinet, so I can keep my sweaters in there during the summer. The moths won't get them. I have the ZT Lunchbox, and I have a little Magnetone, really small, light Magnetone. I think it's just got 110. I don't know the model number. It's probably 10 watts, but it has the cool tremolo vibrato, and it's a beautiful recording amp when I want a little grainier vibe. Nice. Yeah, that's it. That's what
this is an old amp. You're talking not a new Magnetone, an old one.
No. It looks like 50s, probably 1950s. I can send Jason a photo of it.
Please, yeah. And then what about with Wilco?
Well, I'm using the Studious Mosley the last few years. Ever since the Schmilko album, we started using smaller, lower wattage amps, which was a real blessing to my ears. We weren't using anything above 40 watts on stage, I don't think. But, so I was playing this incredible amp called the Schroeder. At that time, it was called the DB7, which Tim Schroeder made with me in mind. He designed it for me. And it was 40-watt head with a 412 Marshall reissue bottom of the offset Marshall, those beautiful offset Marshalls that they did like 200 or 300 of. And it just sounded like God, but it was so loud that it was always pointed away from me and destroying my guitar tech. And so when we went to Schmilko, I started out trying to use that Milkman Princeton style one, but it didn't have enough headroom, particularly for when I play lap steel and I have a compressor on, and it just was mushy. So in order to get a little bit more headroom, I started playing the Studious Mosley, which is 20 watts or 21 watts or something, and that's what I've been using. It's 212s.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you, Jeff Tweedy, famously, I mean, I was lucky enough to visit there once or twice, famously has a giant floor full of gear at the Wilco Loft, filled with everything imaginable, including a lot of amps. Have you played through all of those, and do you lust after any of those weird amps that Jeff has collected?
No, I haven't played through hardly any of them.
Okay.
I even have, I probably have about at least 10 amps there that are all small amplifiers. He has some amps that he has, I think, just for comic relief.
Okay.
Like a Univox stack that's almost as tall as me. It comes up to almost to my chin, I think, and I'm 6'3". So sometimes he has like a huge, I think he has a Vox Beetle amp, that's massively huge. He doesn't ever use them, I don't think. They're just there because they're amazing just to look at. But then I have a little Silvertone there. I have two vintage Magnetones. I never know the model number. They're probably about 10 watts, but super clean. This was the amp that I used primarily on Sky Blue Sky, and it was my main recording amp with Wilco in the earlier days. And
does that amp have vibrato? Do those amps have vibrato? Okay, so those are probably 213s to all people who keep track of
vibrato,
like that. A Troubadour.
Insane reverb.
Oh, reverb.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, never mind. That's one with reverb, not the one I was thinking.
Well, one of them's a panoramic, actually, Skip. But they're the two that I have are exactly the same, other than the moniker.
Right.
And then Jeff gave me this really weird amp that looks like it's out of the Jetsons one year, and that's a really growly, strident-sounding 112. And I've recorded a couple of things with that for a solo or something. I can't remember what the make is. I don't even know if they're still in business. It looks like it's made out of it's like turquoise, like fiberglass or something. It's just this weird shape, super modernistic.
I think I know what that is.
Shape. Yeah.
And maybe is it painted with kind of a spackle paint? I've seen amps labeled Lafayette that look like that.
I don't know. I'll have to find out. I'll have to ask Mark Greenberg. I'll find out what it is.
I'm going to forget what I was going to ask you because Jason just kept going about stuff.
Oh, come on.
He just wants to talk about El Pato.
Yeah, that stuff is good.
It is. It's incredibly good. And Skip, I grew up in Los Angeles and grew up eating Mexican food my whole life and did not know about El Pato. I don't understand.
But you had it at the restaurant. Yeah, you had it. It's pretty common to have it at when I first tasted it, I said, well, I've had this a million times at just a good, Mexican joint. They get a big can.
We always had Las Palmas. We would have Las Palmas.
Oh, that's good.
At home.
I use that. I use that all the time. Enchiladas. Okay.
Yeah, so that was what my dad made, enchiladas. So I'm going to turn you guys on to something though, because I know you're into Marie Sharp's hot sauces from Belize. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely my favorite shake on hot sauce brand. But I want to turn you on to something. It's a Japanese company. So this guy's a really small company in Japan, but he did partner with a place in Brooklyn called Heatonist. like get it, Heatonist.
Okay.
And it's called, his company, the Japanese gentleman's company, is called Mellow Habanero. And the most genius product he makes, they're all good, is a sesame oil and habanero paste, which is one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten, and it's not super hot. However, Yuzu Heaven is what he collaborated with Heatonist in Brooklyn to make. He's in Osaka, and they're in Brooklyn. And it's Yuzu Heaven, so it's a combination of a habanero hot sauce with yuzu, the very tart Asian citrus fruit. And this stuff will blow your head off, but it's got amazing flavor. And if you can ever find any Mellow Habanero, buy it.
All right. I love it.
I wrote it all down.
Thank you.
Yes, stuff that you can put on rocks and then eat the rocks because it's so good. We're into that.
Exactly. That's right.
Yes. Whoa, food detour. Jason, this guy's like a regular. Right?
I don't think he wants to be a regular, but he has an open invite.
I'm having a blast, so this is good.
I've been trying to remember this for 10 minutes because something you said a long time ago. So your little Zeta thing, right? How about,
ZT?
How about this? Yeah, the ZT Lunchbox dealie, right? And then how about neutral sounding? We won't say transparent, but
yes, neutral.
Ponder this. Yeah, I have to fix all kind of junk, right? Most people send me just chassis. I have a speaker cabinet and a guitar with one pickup on it and a cord, and that's it. You have to have a standard, and that's something that, like you said, when you're checking out a stomp box, you don't want to trip out on how you don't need a really colorful amp. You want something that'll help you hear what the stomp box sounds like. And that's just what I do, because I have to hear what the amp sounds like through my junk, because I don't care what the guy's speaker is or what guitar he uses. And next, the guy, Barry Melton from Country Joe and the Fish, loved to tell me, I fixed the oldest boogie, the one that was made for him, and I got to meet him. And he lived by me.
I love those early boogies are great. I also used to love EVM speakers.
Those
a million watts. I still have.
You bet. Well, anyway, he said that Jimi Hendrix always warmed up in the studio with a solid-state Standell amp and sounded exactly like that. So I'm sure you can make any, like you said, you could utilize a polytone, a monster. As long as it's just not a terrible amp, you can make it sound really good.
Let me ask you, Skip. These, for a while, and maybe it's still happening, I was kind of tortured by, for a while when I joined Wilco, I started to be, I guess I could politely call it solvent for the first time in my adult life. And I used to hang out and went on a search kind of for the amp that I was looking for, like at home, that I could take to gigs. It was about 20 watts or 30 watts. And so I would go to my favorite shop. I was living still in Los Angeles then. I would go to Santa Monica to True Tone Music, and they have tons of gear, new and used, vintage and whatever, and just play through all these different amps. And some of them were really expensive boutique amps. And many of those, and I will not mention brand, had a sound that I can only describe as very bright, and also this kind of weird compressed stuffiness. I don't know how to describe it. It's the kind of sound I can't work with at all, Skip. I'm just telling you that I would plug into these things and there would be this huge, like if I only played triads and I was a telly guy and I wanted to be really sparkly, I'd be in heaven. But with something like my Jazz Master or with a jazz guitar with humbuckers or something, it was so bright and you couldn't get rid of the brightness. And these were really expensive boutique amps, so I just couldn't understand where this paradigm tonally came from and why it's appealing, or it was considered appealing. It was weird. I felt like I was living in some sort of parallel universe, looking for just this sort of neutral sound that you're describing that was warm. What is this? I can mention one of the brands because it's not in business anymore. Matchless. Like Matchless had this sound to me. So I don't know. I just don't get it.
Well, for one thing, amp makers aren't usually awesome musicians. And even amp repairmen, I'm no guitar player, but I know enough to give something to somebody who is and listen to what they say. And I also know enough to know that all the classic stuff that all y'all have loved forever is good. And if I can make stuff that sounds like that, people are going to like it. But the boutique thing, there's only been a few brands that have really made a super long-lasting impact. The one you said you don't like the sound of was one of them. Most of them don't really command much resale after a few years, but there's been a few. But I think most of those amps were made for dreamers who anticipated a gig that they may never get to. You try playing one of those babies at your house, it's just like, it's so. But if you get it wound up outside with a loud band, they have a thing, and there's guys that like telly dudes who are into them for a while. But we're all learning that it's nice to have a more comfy, warmer sound, right? Even Fender, he wanted those things to cut through a band. A blackface amp without any reverb on it can sound a little dry, right? And now that we don't have to play so loud, we can get more back into the older circuits, like our in-your Webster-Chicago thing. Something that's very few components, shorter distance from your fingers to the speaker, and not such a carved-out sound, more of a full sound of a lot of middle, more neutral.
Carved out. That tells the story right there, Skip. Carved out, yes. Okay. I did think of an amp to answer Jason's question about Jeff Tweedy amps. He does have one that I covet.
Okay.
That I played through, and it's a Standell. And it came to me because you mentioned solid-state Standells, which I grew up with, by the way, Skip.
Oh, yeah.
The local music store in West Los Angeles, where I grew up, the two amps they had when they were like a mom-and-pop store were Garnet and Standell, and then later Trainer from Canada. After that, Rode amps, which you can't even find one now, and that's a good thing. But they became really, really like the flagship store for Rode amps.
Those were terrible.
Horrible. My amp,
but the other ones were great.
Acoustic 150. Yeah.
Acoustic made some good stuff, but Rode, no. Okay. Standell, yes. And Trainer and Garnet, Kansas.
Yeah, they're still around. This one that Jeff has is a tube Standell, and it's, I think, kind of the Wes Montgomery amp, but not exactly. And it is godlike.
Tube Standell amps are a lot more expensive. I've been fortunate enough to work on a few of the first ones that the guy made and wrote the names down of the famous dudes on the butcher paper. They're all tube. But they're kind of out of the price range of most people. But they sound full and high fidelity. He already wanted something louder than the Fender at the time and less raw and raucous sounding, So steel guitar players, got to have a little headroom.
Well, the blues guys, most of the blues guys that I admire the most, really the twins. They're just one of the twin. Even when my friend, my late and brilliant friend Calvin Newborn, who had started out as a blues guy, and whose first guitar was given to him by B.B. King, even when he became a bebop guy and beyond, always wanted a twin.
Well, if you had a good service twin pre-1975 maybe, sitting there with good speakers in it, you'd know what to do. You'd be able to use it live, or you'd be able to have fun with it at home. It just, sometimes, like we were talking about the boutique guys, I still occasionally see a beautiful amp like that where someone went in there and changed almost every part in it to something brand new. And it's not just the recipe, it's the ingredients. You can't just clone a Deluxe reverb and have it sound like a real one. You got to have the smoked paprika, is what we say. So, you intrinsically just know all of that because, you just say some stuff is easier to get a good sound off of, and it's just more relaxing to play and get to the point where you're not thinking about the amp, but you're making, you're playing music instead of going, my amp, right?
Right.
And I also I discourage people coming on and hyping their own junk, but it's great to hype good builders. Like you mentioned 2 or 3 boutique builders that you use, and we're all about that. Promoting those guys for sure, right?
We should break the rule because Nels has a string of incredible albums on Blue Note, including Share the Wealth, which just came out. When was it? 10 years ago? I know it wasn't 10 years ago, but everything feels like a time warp.
Wait, what? What?
No, I'm just saying with COVID, everything feels like it's in slow motion. But...
Mary Halverson, right? Didn't you play with her?
I have played with Mary. Mary. Yeah, not much.
I just discovered her.
The last time I played with Mary, I was doing a resonator guitar sextet.
Whoa!
At the Stone, and she had never played a resonator guitar, nor had my friend Ava Mendoza. But since I'm obsessed with resonator guitars, I had a few, and my friend Joel Harrison had 2, and he was in the ensemble. So I had Elliot Sharp and Joel Harrison and Julian Lodge and Mary Halverson and Ava Mendoza and me. I can't remember. Is that 6? I don't even know. I think I forget.
All resonator.
Yeah, it was definitely a racket.
And is that all new stuff?
This was just directed improvisation. I divided it up into 3 people with one set of instructions and 3 people with another set, and then I would just pull the pieces of paper off the music stand, and it would say things like, the note A in multiple, octaves, like play A, and then we'd have on the other side we'd be playing like variations on chord progression, and I'd have but not in time. So we're just kind of constantly doing textures and doing polyphony and investigating the parameters of these instruments.
Whoa! Are they all new? Are they all current, like modern nationals or something?
Oh no, no. I had
They're all old?
One of them. No, I have it right here at home right now. I have from a few years ago, California National. It's like a cream white one with a pickup that I asked you to put in it, and it's really great. And I had I think on that gig played my Supro Folk Star, which is a fiberglass guitar.
I of
really
course know what that is.
And actually, Mary has. I loaned that sort of to Mary so she can play it and do whatever she wants with it from now until whenever.
Cool.
And I have a really old. I don't even remember the year. It's this National that is kind of a guitar I shouldn't own because it's so fancy and marvelous. And I bought it at T.R. Crandall, and Tom Crandall has a blog that they created about his refurbishing of this really old dobro that had been owned by a man named Curtis Rogers. Nobody knows who this was, but he put Curtis R. painted on the fingerboard and has a painting of his wife supposedly on it. It's extremely distressed. It has amazing tone. Nobody knows why it was played to death. Nobody knows why the biscuit didn't go flabby. It's phenomenal. I've got a square neck Showbro, which was not on that gig. We were playing all round neck. God, what else? I know I have at least one more resonator guitar in my life, but can't think right now.
Well, that's pretty far out. That's cool. I bet you've heard King Benny Nawahi and, the super hot 20s jazz influenced Hawaiian dudes playing those things.
Yeah, that stuff's scary. I don't have anything legit that I do on electric or on dobro. I have no regular, I don't play with finger picks. I don't have any regular finger style technique. I just like the sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the folk star. I had that little solid body one. I can't remember what it's called, but with a resonator in it from the early 60s. Not the folk star was the fiberglass with the full guitar shape, but there's like a little Les Paul shaped thing that really fit the resonator. And it didn't sound much compared to an old DeWollian or something, but it was still really fun, and I probably should have kept it. But like you, I was always poor. If I had something that was worth any money, it was like, get rid of this, give money to your wife. Baby needs a new pair of shoes. So, Jason, are you there? What do you got?
I'm here. I want Nels to give a quick plug to his amazing recordings, his solo recordings. Nels was on the cover of the Fretboard Journal 37 for the Lovers double album, which is still one of my favorite all-time albums. But Nels, what's your most recent release, and what are you working on right now at home?
Okay, thank you, Jason. Here I go. Well, the most recent release came out in November, and it's a double album on Blue Note called Share the Wealth. It's my band, the Nels Cline Singers. As you know, there are no actual singers in the Nels Cline Singers. and it's an expanded version of the band. The one original member is Scott Amendola, the brilliant drummer and band leader himself. And Devin Hoff used to play bass for the first 10 years. It's been 20 years this month that this band has existed. And Trevor Dunn is the bassist the last 10 years. And Cyril Baptista on percussion. And he's been doing it for a few years. And then I've added Brian Marcella, brilliant keyboardist, playing a whole rainbow of keyboards. And Skerrick on tenor saxophone and his pedal board effects that he uses brilliantly with the tenor saxophone. It goes by just Skerrick. Scott and Skerrick are West Coast people. The rest of us are East Coast people, and it's going to be, I guess, difficult to get together. The band still never played a gig in this particular lineup iteration. And the music is typically, I guess, for me, all over the place, but has a lot of improvising on it, some extended improvisations that I was very pleased with. So I just put them on the record and played it for Don Was, and Don said, let's do this. So there you go. And what am I working on now? I've been just recording little tidbits for people. And I have a track that I'm going to submit to Slim at Kill Rock Stars. He asked me to do a cover for their 30th anniversary of something from their catalog. So I, along with my wife Yuka and a good friend, the brilliant drummer, percussionist, composer Chess Smith, got together, sort of together. Chess is in Brooklyn and we're up here in upstate New York, but put together a Deerhoof cover, one of my favorite bands of all time, and one of my favorite songs called Jagged Fruit. So we're working on that.
Love it.
And I wrote some music. I got a grant to write and perform music with my Brooklyn quartet, which I'm calling the Concentric Quartet. So obviously can't perform yet, but I wrote a bunch of music. The quartet consists of Tom Rainey on drums, Chris Lightcap on acoustic bass, and Ingrid Laubrock on saxophones, and me. And so kind of chipping away at that, and then doing a little bit of recording, like, people ask me to do a guitar solo, so I play a guitar solo. Yuka records it and send it off in email. And I have some workshops. I just finished a couple of workshops for my friend Joel Harrison's Alternative Guitar Summit. Mm-hmm. So we do these online things. This is very nerve-wracking for me. I'm not used to being in kind of a professorial mode. I didn't really learn guitar from a teacher or anything like that, so I don't consider myself to be particularly qualified to teach, but I can tell stories. And I guess that's what I've been doing.
It's fantastic.
I say fantastic. I didn't know. I can't do this gig either.
Jason, you asked me to mention some music that that I'm listening to or that of mention.
Yeah.
And so I actually thought about it. I have to think ahead of time because when I get asked this question and I get surprised, my mind always goes blank. But I'd say that there are two things that came to mind. One is that I've just been completely going back into the Wayback Machine, into a super mega nostalgia rush, and checking out these NRK Norwegian Molde Jazz Festival videos that are popping up on the YouTube. Particularly,
you're talking from the 50s,
Oregon. We're talking 70s stuff. This would be the stuff that I've been revisiting and just swooning over has been Oregon Live 1975 from Molde. Ralph Towner's,
right?
Ralph Towner's Solstice Quartet Live Molde 1978 and Weather Report Live 1972. So it's the most dramatic video representation of when Eric Gravatt was playing drums with Weather Report, which there's scant video evidence of. So this was like a gift from heaven. So there's that, and then of something new for the young people. I really love. Yuka and I both really love Ohmme. That's Ohmme. Two young women in Chicago. Really inventive, forward-leaning, a kind of pop music, I guess. But they're both really, really great singers with really interesting ideas. But the music's still very direct, and they're just geniuses. So we love Ohmme.
I love it.
There you go. That's good stuff. Yeah, Ralph Towner.
Nels interviewed Ralph for us.
Yeah,
I did. I wrote a piece on Ralph. I guess I'm stuck in Ralph land. In fact, I've been doing this solo 12-string piece. I did the first version of it's online, and I'm still kind of tweaking it. It's very it's fake finger style capo open tune 12-string, and the working title may stick. It's called. I've been calling it "Thank You, Ralph."
Beautiful.
Because it's so Towner inspired. I can't get away from that. It's just really heavy.
I love it. Nels, thanks for being on the Truth About Vintage Amps podcast.
Okay, did we get to any truth about vintage amps? I think we did.
Oh man, I thought we'd only have 5 minutes. This was great.
We got hot sauce tips. We got to go down a YouTube rabbit hole. You did well.
I'd be honored to come back and blab more with you guys. Skip, what a pleasure.
Thank you. I mean,
Thanks,
all right.
You just don't get to talk to people who. The internet is just information. It's not knowledge. And we try to have not just a bunch of jabbering, but, well, of course, there's always plenty of that. But, when somebody like you says something, then it's different than just somebody who lives in his mom's basement saying something. And it's an honor to have you. The honor is all ours. So, and hopefully we can get you again. We'll bribe you with more crazy food gifts or something. Give you a slice of the country ham I just got.
Jason just sent 6 cans of El Pato to me that arrived yesterday, so I'm actually in your debt. So here we go.
Take it up to Canada, and you can sell it for like $10 a can.
Yeah, they don't even get it up there. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again,
Bye, Nels.
All right. Take care. Bye, Jason.
Bye.
Wow. I say an absolute born guest. I mean, talking about other people and other stuff, and I mean, he didn't. Well, it was great.
He's an amazing
really
person.
Great.
He's a good friend to all that we do here.
We're not even talking about the musicianship side of it, but just.
We love him.
He didn't talk about himself.
No, I had to pry it out of him. But
yeah, that's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are we going to do maybe a quick 20 minutes or something of Q&As, or are you done?
If you got time, I got questions.
I have time for you.
All right.
Of course.
So
Ralph Towner.
that was Nels Cline, and this is the 65th episode of the Truth About Vintage Amps podcast, hosted by Skip Simmons. Shout out to our sponsors, Grez Guitars, grezguitars.com, and Amplified Parts, your one-stop shop for guitar and amplifier parts. I'm a little speechless here. But folks, the way this show normally works when we don't have amazing guitarists on it is you call us up at 509-557-0848 and leave us a voicemail, or you email us a question at podcast@fretboardjournal.com, or a voice memo, which it turns out is the highest fidelity option of all. And you send us topics or amp questions, and then we go from there. Skip answers them. So... do you want to just dive into it, Skip? Do you have anything you want to talk about?
Sure. I got a few things, but we don't need to. I got a few questions for our listeners, just to like a little mini poll of what.
Oh.
See, to check out the interest in some things that I was thinking about doing. And you know me, I never know what anybody wants.
Let's do that while we still have a captive audience of people who tuned in just for Nels Cline.
Okay, so the goal would be to try to actually have a bunch of y'all with a schematic in your hand. Don't freak out. If I really score, we can make it entertaining enough for people that don't have a schematic in their hand and don't care. But I'm just talking about maybe 5 or 10 minutes where we all look at the blackboard together, and we need a certain topic that we're going to try to do. Like, say, the difference between a Tweed Deluxe and a Brown Deluxe, or say the difference between a silver-faced Champ and a Tweed Princeton, or a little bit of a deeper dive into the Gibson amps, like which ones are interesting and which ones need to only be poked at with a 10-foot pole. So I try not to make it just completely like if you can't read schematics, you can't learn anything. But it would be something that would involve having some schematics. Maybe, how about a quick view of the Fender Princeton? You know, they kept the name the same, but they changed the amp completely. You know, that's why after the guy says Princeton, I say, really, what year? You know, because one's completely different from the other. And you don't have to know a lot about schematics. If I'm sitting there yelling at you and saying, see this part, this part, this part, and I think we could probably convey some good info that way. But what do I know? We'll see if there's some emails and calls about people who are interested in that, or emails and calls from people who are totally bored and just want to talk about other stuff. So,
okay.
So fire away with some questions.
All right.
And we'll
I'll make a poll for that via our Instagram page that I often neglect. And
now, what do you want to see?
Yeah, what do you want to see? And we'll figure it out from there. All right.
One other little addendum I just thought, because this is somebody I want to talk to someday, but I haven't gotten around to it. Quite a few years ago, somebody started putting schematics up on the internet for free. Schematic Heaven. And if you are that guy or gal, or you know that guy or gal, they deserve some love because it's free. And it's obviously some person that just felt the need to do it. And once again, a schematic, a factory one, that's knowledge. That's not just some talk. And that's a place that you could, if you didn't want to invest in buying a bunch of stuff, you know, I'd want people to download some stuff so they had the paper right in their hand, you know, and we could like prep for it by saying, okay, we're going to need these 5 schematics, get them. And that's one place that you could get them for free. And I'd love to share the love for that guy. I'm going to maybe just email him and see if, you know, maybe he'll just come on for a minute, or at least let me say some encouraging things about his site, because I don't think there's any money involved. I think it's just a labor of love, and, you know, we all love that.
Sure.
So, anyway, now, fire away with the questions.
Okay. This show bounces around to topics that we've covered sometimes a year ago, sometimes a month ago, sometimes a week ago. So let me just recommend, if anyone, I'm sorry if this is your situation, if you're tuning into this show for the first time, if you Google Truth About Vintage Amps index page, there is a giant index page on fretboardjournal.com that has every topic pretty much that we've talked about, aside from some of the food diversions. But this first voicemail references, I believe, the baffler-esque question you posed. I think it was in episode 64. So I'm just going to play it.
Hey guys, I'm just calling in for Skip's latest baffler to guess that the reason the Fender reverb unit didn't have its own depth cap was because it was intended to be connected to the back of your amplifier through the auxiliary power outlet, which would have been connected to a depth cap. Don't know that for sure, just a guess. Sam in San Francisco. Thanks for the bafflers, guys. Keep them coming.
How'd he do?
Sam's on, yes, absolutely. Sam's on the case. You have to, inherently, you have two things plugged in to the wall, and you're using them connected together. So like if you're using two amps at once, which was kind of rare back then, but if you're using a reverb unit and an amp, you got to have the polarity the same on both amps. It's not enough to have both of them grounded with a three-prong cord. You need to have the polarity the same. So that they always kept the two-prong on the reverb units, and you always knew to try it both ways. And yes, you could. There's an AC convenience outlet on the back of a Fender amp, and they assumed that you were going to plug that thing in right there. And that puts you in parallel with the amp and allows it to actually utilize the depth cap that's in the amp. Good knowledge.
Nice work.
Yes, that guy gets a gold star.
All right.
Next.
Hey guys, this is Morgan from Truckee, California. I am working on my buddy Gil's amp. Gil is a fellow kegger, and this amp is a Gibson-made Maestro Reverb Echo Tweed amp from the early 60s. It's similar to a Tweed champ, except it has tremolo also, and it's the poster child for speaker-driven reverb in that it has a reverb tank in it that was supposed to only work when hooked to the output of a different amp. However, the amp that we have here has the reverb tank wired in already, so that the input of the tank is fed off a line from the output transformer, which connects to a 200 ohm resistor, drops a 4.7K resistor to ground, and then goes to the input of the tank. And then the output of the tank goes to the input of the amp, and through the normal circuitry that amp has there to handle that mixing. You'd think this creates a big old feedback loop and it'd be just a giant mess, but it actually works a bit. However, in practice, the amount of reverb is determined by the volume on the amp, and so when the amp is turned down low, there's not enough reverb, and when the amp's cranked, there's kind of too much reverb. So we're wondering, in an attempt to create the world's best vintage Tweed champ-style amp with reverb and vibrato, is there a way, a not too invasive way and reversible way, to leave the tank hardwired in as it is, but also better control the reverb, possibly by adding a pot to the reverb tank loop so that you can lower the signal at high volumes and raise the signal at low volumes. The way Gil sees it is having to adjust the reverb level for different volume levels is a small price to pay for having built-in reverb in a Tweed vibro champ without having to make major modifications. I'm wondering if we're overlooking anything. Is there any other way that we should be looking here to drive that tank? Have you done this before? Have you seen these wired in like this before? It's interesting. Thanks for all you do. Love the podcast. Listen to every episode. It's always a treat. Skip, all the free advice you've given over the years makes it super easy to be a Patreon subscriber. I suggest everyone listening subscribe to the Patreon. It's $5 a month, super easy and worth it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Truckee, California, like where the Donner Party was and where there's been 20 feet of snow. You know it's snowing there right now. And that guy can call me about this. Yeah. Here's what I really needed to know at the very beginning is what exactly is the model number of this thing? And I believe I know, but it'd be nice to be certain. So what he has is a little Gibson amp that says something about reverb on it, but when you turn it on and play it, it doesn't have reverb. There's a tank in there, right? But it doesn't have reverb because it's made to have a cable going from down inside the amp, usually missing, over to amp A and clip on to amp A's speaker. Then when you turn up this Gibson thing, it's speaker-driven reverb. But what he wants to do is he wants to make it so it's a standalone amp with reverb and not have to do it that goofy way. And I admit that the speaker-driven reverb is kind of lame and impractical compared to a Fender Deluxe reverb with a reverb knob on it, in a way. Sonically, they're really cool, but they're kind of clunky. It's complex in its own way because you got to have 2 amps. Adding reverb to an amp that doesn't have it is not easy, and that amp doesn't really have reverb. Right? I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There are some Gibsons like this that have reverb circuitry within them. So somebody calls me up and they say, I got a Silverface Champ, can you add reverb to it? Here's a tank I bought. And I go, great, except the parts to make that work, there's more than parts to the reverb than there is in this entire amp. Right? It's not just the tank. That's kind of the beauty of the speaker-driven reverb is all you really need is the tank and a few little parts, and you can create reverb without a dedicated circuit within an amp to do it. So I would suggest making the thing work like it did when it was new. Legendary Sacramento dude, Robert Sidwell, he played a gig, a loud blues gig with a Tweed basement and a Gibson version of one of these things. It's like a 5-watt. And he said he had plenty of reverb because there's no low end in reverb, and you don't need much power to amplify high frequencies. And that's all you're really doing in a reverb setup. So you don't need a super high-powered amp to create the reverb. So there you go. Fix it like it was supposed to be, hopefully. And adding reverb to an amp that doesn't have it is quite a project. And the way they're doing it, it sounds to me like just a crazy hillbilly way that worked, which of course we heartily endorse. They got it rigged up somehow so that the speaker of this little thing is driving the tank, and then they're coming out of the tank and into the amp, like a couple of different, maybe with 1 and 2 input jacks or something. And they've got reverb, sort of, but it would sound better hooked up the stock way. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. I had a good customer, the Captain Steve Peckingham from Los Angeles. Thank you. He was hoping to do the speaker-driven reverb, but didn't realize that amp A has to have a speaker hooked onto it. He didn't want that. He just wanted the second part. And I'm not sure if he ever tried using a dummy load or something like that, but that's why speaker-driven reverb didn't catch on, because ultimately there's more gear that you have to make it work. And thanks, Truckee Guy. If you ever dig out of the snow, call me, and we'll talk some more about that project. Make sure make sure I'm giving you guys the right answer. Next.
All right. This was supposed to be for a Patreon episode, but I didn't get it in time. We could have played this one for Nels too, but I'm playing it for you. So here goes.
Skip, Jason, this is Barrett in Mississippi. I know Mrs. Simmons is not one to come on the podcast, but in the spirit of Skip's previous advice on parenting, I'm wondering if he has any marriage advice. Since he has obviously been happily married to Mrs. Simmons for quite some time now. Thank you. Hope y'all are well. Bye.
Wow, that covers a lot of bases.
Mm-hmm.
Aim high, a little out of your league is a good start. Right? She's way smarter and oh man, I hope she lets me, take her out to dinner. Aim high. That's also good for colleges if your kids are getting ready to go to college. You don't know what really good school might want that kid. So aim high. And then I've always just pretty much done almost whatever she says. And, the priority being as a family guy, it was never a big decision for me to like $60. Am I going to go buy an ounce of Colombian, or am I going to go home and give it to my wife? Right? I
Sure.
gave it to my wife. Yeah, that was not cocaine. I meant just like pot in the 70s. Well, that was before I got married. But, no guitar collections, no jet skis, no fancy nothing, because the goal is more of a family thing, to get the kids out of your hair. Now that they are out of your hair, it's still the same. I do whatever she wants. That's why I can't get as many. One reason why I can't get as many amp sticks during the plague is she's home, working from home. Are you going to make lunch? I mean, normally I'd come in and have like a little piece of cheese and a cracker and some cold coffee and just go back down to the shop until 5 o'clock. But now I want to give the goats a shot. Okay. So grab a hold of the really good one. You did. I'm sure you did that. A little over your station and then do whatever they want. Hopefully it'll work out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do the goats need shots often?
Animals, livestock are not no maintenance, you know. Even dogs sometimes, but livestock, you got to get out there and trim their hooves, and they have to be wormed occasionally, right? That's where you dump a bunch of worms on them. No, you give them stuff so that they have internal parasites that can take care of it. And yeah, in the aftermath of the dog attack, we had to do a lot of doctoring for a long time after that. So it's not completely maintenance free.
Yeah. I was floored when I buy our dog and cat food at the little neighborhood pet feed store, because now I live out in the sticks, which means I'm 25 minutes away from civilization, but not really. And they sell they sell syringes for all the stuff that you would, if you lived in the city, go pay a vet for, like feline leukemia. You can just buy it there for like $7. Do it yourself.
That's
no idea.
not the case in California. A lot of those things are not available. It used to be you could go to the feed store and there's a big refrigerated like cooler where you'd keep Cokes, but it would be full of drugs, you know, strong shit. You could just buy and inject yourself. They're cracking down on that in California. You might see a change in that up there over the next few years.
I'm going to stockpile it with El Pato, mail it to folks at various Patreon tiers and see where it goes.
Maybe. But yeah, I think you might see a change on that after a while, because of course we're less and less responsible for ourselves as we go through time. And
I'm not going to shoot up my dog or cat. It seems
that's a skill. Yeah, don't do that unless you have. That's a skill. I mean, to see a vet do it, you go, yeah, okay, but a lot of it's under the skin, but you're not jabbing it into their muscle. So you're like making a little tent and getting it at this right angle. Sometimes the hide is really tough and takes quite a bit of pressure. I don't do it. Mrs. Simmons does that, and I hold them. I hold them still. But she doesn't trim hooves. That's physical, and I got a lot of injuries from doing that. It's hard.
All right. Thanks
how
for
did
that.
We get off on?
We're talking about how to keep your wife from leaving you.
Exactly.
All right. One more voicemail, maybe?
Hey, Skip and Jason. This is Matthew from Atlanta. A lot of cool PA head talk on that last episode reminded me. I've been meaning to ask Skip about an old Lafayette PA that I recently scored from my church gig. I've found it buried under many years of dust under the stage with the original manual. I think it's from the late 40s, rated at 100 watts with 6 6L6s and a really cool looking expander circuit, and also some wooden knobs, which I've never seen before. I was thinking this might make a cool studio preamp, particularly with that expander circuit, and so I was wondering, after it's been serviced, what steps Skip might take in that direction, and if he thinks it's a good candidate for that. Alternately, I think it might make a cool bass amp, but it weighs a ton, and I don't do too many bass gigs, particularly these days. So that is my question. I do have one cooking tip in regards to a caller from a few episodes back about how to use up old holiday spices. I really like to make a Caribbean drink called Sorrel in the summertime with cinnamon and hibiscus tea and nutmeg and cloves and such. Great with whatever kind of liquor you want to throw in there. I personally like Del Magui Mezcal. Thanks for the podcast, guys. Cheers.
Good one. Nice strong finish there. Good aftertaste. Okay, Lafayette PA amp. Mm-hmm. Lafayette was a retailer, not a manufacturer. So a Lafayette amp could be almost anything. They started a long time ago. So you see Lafayette stuff starting in the mid to late 30s. And, of course, all the way up into the 50s and 60s when they gradually got rid of the tubes. But what this guy got, whoa, I didn't get to tell Nels Cline that most people buy a logging truck, even though they don't do any logging anymore, but they want to someday. And that's the amp thing we got going on here. 6L6s. So first the guy said it's 100 watts. I'm thinking it's a classic little 10-watt amp that uses 100 watts because it says that on the back. But if that sucker is 6L6s, that might be a 100-watt amp, right? That's a beast. It has a built-in compression or expansion circuit. That's 1 million more tubes. I hate to say it, but this thing is not affordable to restore unless you had someone local. You didn't have to ship it, and someone who would work really cheap. And my advice would be to carefully restore it. That's an amp that's going to need every single capacitor because they're going to be all ancient old wax bombs, right? And then when you're done, if you don't do any logging, it's not going to be as fun because the thing is a monster. I bet it would be a great bass amp if it was restored and working. But it's going to be one bodacious project. And then the last wet blanket is it has a compression or expansion circuit in it. But no, it's not a compressor or it's an amp. And you can't just take that little part out of it and expect it to work. Everybody still is fired up about getting the guts from old reel-to-reels to make mic preamps out of. And yes, there's a mic preamp in there, but there's a ton of other stuff in there that you don't need. And that's the same thing with this gigantic amp. It can't be made into a compressor or something like that. I mean, if you had it working and hooked up to a speaker, you could put any kind of signal through it you want and record that. That's a tiny telephone move. And in that way, you could make it a processor. But you can't make an amp into a preamp. You take those 6L6s out of that thing, it's not just suddenly going to work except not drive a speaker. It's going to throw that whole thing off. Fabulous find, by the way. Clean it and send us a good picture because that's a really expensive, complex, top-of-the-line PA from the old days.
But what should he do with it?
Look at it for now. And if he himself or someone he knows locally, that he doesn't have to pay too much, rebuild it. I know a guy who bought a Honda that didn't even run.
Yeah, that was me.
So it's intrinsically it's fantastic, just like the Honda. Doesn't he? Hope you didn't.
I want to see the wooden knobs.
He told me, I hope you didn't pay too much for that. I'm going, what? That Honda is so freaking cool, dude. It's worth 3 times what I paid for it. Anyway, it would have been awesome to find an MA17 or a single-ended little Bogan or something that everybody wants and would be easy to ship, if you had to send it somewhere to get fixed. This guy just had to find that one. And I'd suggest clean it, look at it, enjoy it, trip out on it, find the schematic. It's probably in the writer, I think, maybe. And why don't you learn so much about it that you can look in there and figure out how that compression circuit works and then build a compressor instead of an amp, right? That sounds fun. But if you want it to actually work the way it was intended, it's going to be a big restoration job, and I'm sure it would sound awesome if it was fixed. But I'm not doing it. And I wouldn't let someone ship it because that thing probably weighs 40 or 50 pounds. 6L6s, y'all. I bet it has more than one rectifier tube, too. Probably 2 or 3 tube rectifiers on that thing and a bunch of huge transformers and wild. Super cool, but difficult to really utilize without a certain amount of work.
Okay. We got a couple. Let me have you answer a couple of, including this one from Lucas in Switzerland near Oberhasli. I don't know where that is.
Oh,
it sounds beautiful.
Yeah, that's where the Oberhasli dairy goats come from. And those are the kind we have.
Okay. That's why he mentioned it.
Come on. Mm-hmm.
Gosh,
Yeah, they're the most beautiful dairy goats. Yeah, the Oberhasleys. Take a look at them.
So maybe you'll help Lucas out. He has a subject line, fundamental capacitor question. What actual steps do you perform to determine whether a capacitor must be replaced or can be left in the circuit? I am sure you don't unsolder every cap in an old amp for testing or for substitution. I hope you can cover this one in a little bit more detail. That's from Lucas.
First, we have to define what kind of capacitor we're talking about. And there's two major types in an amp. One is an electrolytic, and it's polarized. It has a plus and a minus. And you have values in the mini microfarads, like 20 microfarads, 50 microfarads. The other kind are little dinky things that are not electrolytic, and they're smaller values, like 0.01 and 0.02 of a microfarad. The first ones are used in the power supply. They store electricity so that when you unplug your amp while you're playing, it doesn't just stop working. It goes, because there's a bunch of juice in there. The other smaller ones generally are used in tone circuits and coupling capacitors. They carry the signal, the sound, basically, from one section to the other in an amp. Those ones cannot leak DC. Got to see your Jack Darr. It's big as anything right there. Testing coupling capacitors for DC leakage. There's a bunch of voltage on one side of it when it's in the amp and working, and on the other side of that same capacitor there can't be any voltage. But what happens to them after a million years is they break down inside and start letting that DC through, and then you got issues. The other type, the electrolytics, are really hard to test accurately without a bunch of test equipment that costs a lot of money. So I use a thing called an ESR checker all the time, equivalent series resistance. It's just one little test you can do to electrolytic capacitors without unsoldering. But when somebody brings you a center volume vibrasonic, you don't unsolder anything if you don't have to. So you check those things out with that. If they show bad, they are bad. If they show good, they might still be bad, but you've done something. Jack Darr will also tell you that you can substitute electrolytic capacitors or even parallel in another one with an existing capacitor. And if you note a difference in performance, that's an indicator as well. The actual capacitance of capacitors can be measured with a capacitance meter, which is on most decent flukes these days. You know, get up to about $150, you probably have a capacitance meter on there too. But they can be tricky. There's a million little things to look for. But the main ones would be DC leakage in coupling capacitors and ESR as a way to test electrolytics without unsoldering them in Oberhasli, Switzerland. Get the Jack Darr. Schematics are in every language. You know, it doesn't matter.
That's beautiful.
You know, it can be in Italian. Yeah, it's a thought, right? I mean, Ohm's law is Ohm's law. Don't ask me to recite what that actually is, but you know, schematics just have a small handful of designations, and they don't change. They're all basically the same. They might have different words for the parts, but the schematics can be read by anyone. So there you go. Is that pretty good coverage?
That was good. I'm always curious when we have these listeners with vintage amps that are in far-flung places of the world, like what the amp tech scene is. I can't imagine that you can still take your old Fender to the local guitar store and get it fixed, but maybe somebody will let me know about their local scene.
Yeah, American amps in Europe or other places, South America. I have a couple of Brazilian customers, and you know, a Fender amp down there is worth double what it would be anywhere else. They just don't have stuff like that. There weren't, even Australia, right? They had the golden tones, but they didn't really have their own Fender, so to speak. England, of course, exception because we had Vox and Marshall, but other places, and all those tariffs they had, you know, back then, that's why you see tubes that are made in Russia that say they're made in Germany and they're labeled RCA. And all those deals, you know, where Marshall couldn't sell Marshalls in this part of the country and had to make those ones that say Park, you know, that sort of stuff. So Switzerland, I would think, would be tough. We need a DIY scene there so they can start making some good stuff if they can't find it there.
All right, I got one more for you.
Okay.
This one has been kicking around for a while, and I feel guilty. I was originally going to try to patch Larry Chung in. We'll patch Larry Chung in for some other episode because I didn't give him a heads up on this. So Oystein in Norway has a question about a crazy Gibson EH-150 he bought off eBay. Several years ago, I bought a Gibson EH-150 off eBay. The amp was water damaged and the cabinet was rotted to pieces, so it was listed without a cab. When I got it, all of the parts were just flying around in the box. The speaker was damaged beyond repair and one of the tubes was crushed. I didn't want to ship it back, so I just stuffed everything away and forgot about it for years. Then, after listening to you guys talk about the EH-150 in almost every episode, I was inspired to fix it. I had to replace almost all resistors and capacitors. Only one mica cap and 4 resistors survived. Every transformer, including the phase splitter, is working good. I replaced the field coil with resistors, and I used a Jensen P12R. I'm happy to say that the amp is now working and sounding good in a new Tweed solid pine cabinet. So, my question, Skip, what is your favorite speaker when fixing or building EH-150s and you don't use a field coil speaker? And then he also wants to know, when replacing field coils in 150s, do you use a choke or resistors? And then he asked me if I have the original speaker in my EH-150, and I do, with an asterisk, because it's currently getting reconed at some guy in West Seattle, Washington, and I don't know if I'll ever see it again. So, Skip, take it away.
Okay. Cool story.
Mm-hmm.
And he said Norway.
Yep.
That's probably the only Gibsons in Norway. He's talking EH-150, which we know of as like Charlie Christian amp.
Yep.
And
Beautiful.
he's talking about the model that instead of using a tube phase inverter, uses a transformer phase inverter. And the fact that he got it going and it works is just, did they say skull there? Something, I say awesome. That's just a high five from down here where it's not so cold. And I would lose that P12R. That's a small magnet speaker, and part of those things is the field coil speaker in there wasn't no piece of junk. They didn't stop using those because they didn't sound good. They stopped using them because they're cheaper to make a permanent magnet speaker. But those amps are loud and punchy, and I think he needs a bigger magnet speaker in there is all I would say, something with some more headroom. Then circuit geeks know that field coils make the magnet. They don't have a magnet. They just have a big coil of wire. And when you run a bunch of electricity through it, it creates a magnet. If not that I've done this that many times, but if I had to replace a field coil speaker, you really want a choke, not a resistor, to replace the field coil in the field coil speaker. And it should be in the same part of the schematic, or the same part of the circuit as the original. And I would suggest you need a big one that can handle a lot of current. 150 milliamps, please. 125 would probably do it, because all the juice of the whole output stage is being drawn through that choke. In later Fenders that have chokes, it's not set up like that. The chokes can be a lot smaller because they're not carrying as much current. So use a choke. High five rescuing that thing. Get a bigger magnet speaker in it. It'll have more clean, punchy bass to it. And is that it?
I guess so. I can tell you what Larry... I forwarded this to Larry because Larry's knee-deep in restoring these things. Do you want to hear what Larry Chung had to say?
I'll tell Larry Chung on the podcast something that not too many people realize. It was a little bit of a shocker to me.
Okay.
If you look hard enough, you can find a schematic for a Tweed Pro, very early one, called a 5A5. And you will see that thing has a field coil, and one end of the field coil is connected to B+, and the other end is connected to ground. In other words, the field coil is not being utilized as a choke in the power supply, like we always say they are. So you could say, who cares? I say, if you could find the right field coil, you could have a field coil speaker on an amp that wasn't even made to have one, because it's not an integral part of the circuit like it is in almost every other amp. Now, what's Larry have to say? You may have to condense it.
Aw, Larry, don't listen to Skip. We're going to have you on
Larry will dig that. He'll freak out. He'll freak out when he hears that about that one field coil deal.
So we could be adding field coil speakers to any old amp if we really wanted to.
Hey, well, just look at that schematic. It seems crazy, but it obviously worked. And it's a different way of approaching it that, okay, how about this? If you had a Tweed Pro with a field coil and it was hooked up like I've seen on this schematic, you could just take the field coil out and put a regular old speaker in there. You wouldn't have to do anything to the amp. It would work just fine because it's not hooked up in the power supply like they always are.
All right.
So it's tough to wrap your brain around, but apparently it works, and it's just something to drive Larry crazier. That's why I mentioned it.
Okay, so here is Larry's response, which I will truncate at your request. He says his hot tip is to find a Hammond organ pool, roll a 12-inch 650 to 700 ohm field coil in it, and 8 ohm voice coils. Those come up for sale routinely for $100 to $200. There's a 6-pin plug that needs to be wired up that needs to complete the 5-volt filament loop. Not too tricky to figure out. The amp will sound awesome with a field coil speaker, and the Rolla has plenty of power and will sound great. That's
good. I'm not sure I followed that 5-volt filament loop part. But yes, I think the early M3 Hammonds had a big, beefy Rolla 12-inch field coil, and they sound good. And we tease him, but
he's the best.
You got to do the work. You can't just talk about it, right?
He does the work. He does have a question for you. Larry does. Maybe this can be a subject for when Larry is on the podcast, unless you want to field it right now. It's a question about EH-150s.
Aromatherapy?
No, we're past that.
Not aromatherapy.
He says he keeps reading about from the nut jobs on the internet that the EH-150 is a Class A push-pull circuit, and I don't quite understand how that is determined. Skip might know, or he might brush it off, but it might be a fun deep dive if you are ever in the mood and feeling nerdy, Skip.
I think we talked about this once at the very beginning. Class A became this little catchphrase, like, oh, it's Class A, as though that meant something. It really just refers to a way that the output stage in a tube amp operates. Solid state stuff too, I think, has it. And there's a technical there's a technical thing that's really boring about it. But basically, push-pull means you got two tubes working as a pair, not paralleled, like the little Gibsonettes, but push-pull with a center-tapped output transformer. And Class A has to do with how much current is going through the tubes, how the input to the tubes is set up. Class A stuff has the current going all the time. If you were looking at a Tweed amp on, that needle on your current meter, ammeter, would be sitting there pretty high all the time. Later amps, like fixed bias amps, when you smack the guitar, the needle goes, whoom, draws more current. Class A ones aren't like that. They're always drawing the current all the time, which is why they got rid of them, because they're less efficient. You can get more power out of different circuits. And I would say, I'd say all those EH-150s probably are operating Class A, but it's also kind of variable. There's a gray area. It's not just like, there it is, it's Class A. It has to do with how much signal is going into the amp at any given time. Old cathode bias stuff tends to be running closer to Class A. After that's Class AB, and there's not a distinct line there. That's the thing. And I don't care. Some amps have those little Class A all single-ended amps are Class A. And they have a sustain, even when they're clean. It's like, bah, as compared to two that some people dig. But who cares?
All right.
Have I said that yet today? Probably
You've
not.
said it a few times. Oystein,
Oh, good.
Oystein did also want to recommend some music for us all. He says, check out the
Cool.
Countryside of Harmonica Sam, and then he puts uber cool 50s country from Sweden. The guitar man uses a really cool Bigsby style guitar. And there's a YouTube link which I'll put in the show notes.
Well, there's Norwegian and Swedish blues bands that you got to be Little Charlie to play after them. They're so into it, right? A lot of those bands play really old school, like 40s and 50s style, really low volume amps, little 2-watt amps and stuff like that. And a lot of them are really good. Helgi Tallqvist, really good harmonica player with a really cool band from Finland. And I don't know, they just they didn't bother with the Fog Hat version, of the song. They went right to like the Lead Belly version and stayed there. So I'm not surprised. Harmonica Sam, he said.
That's what he said. The Countryside
checking it
of
out,
Harmonica
people.
Sam.
Probably some wailing, like hot country picking from some guy on that band, on that. Let's check it out.
Sure. You want one more?
I say don't forget when you're sitting around the beauty of streaming on your computer radio stations from all over the country.
Oh, yeah.
I said Voice of the Navajo Nation, KTNN. Awesome. We have KVMR up in Nevada City, Grass Valley. It's a world-class, college station. And you can hear the stuff, maybe not the second you tune in, but don't forget about that. And it's a resource we didn't have until pretty recently, and unless it's super expensive for you to stream, it's basically free. And check out the Chico State College station is fantastic. There's a Hawaiian guy that does a Hawaiian show. I'd be playing some King Benny Nawahi on there. And it's just something you might not think about. And the Voice of the Navajo Nation on a Saturday night is some cool trucker shit and cool Indian bands that just are, it's really hard to define. And then maybe some the crazy Blue Flint boys wailing. It's a lot of fun. So there you go. And I'm ready for our final question.
Okay.
Final countdown.
This is from Christopher in Ohio. He submitted many questions. We're going to just jump to the very last one. We'll hit some of your other ones, Christopher, later in future episodes. Why do so many amps in the Darr book have the volume pot in front of the first stage? Why wouldn't more designers put them between stages like Fender did? Some larger amps seem to have this. It can't be for cost savings. Was it a patent issue? What am I missing? Or is it just some other way of doing the same thing? That is Christopher in Toledo, which he reminds us is the former home of the Roe De-Armand Company.
Exactly, Toledo. First of all, excellent. I sent someone sitting around with a Jack Darr on the couch, and that's the way. You just pick it up on commercials and you just go, what's going on here? This is interesting. And if you learn to read schematics, you can be endlessly entertained if that's the way you roll. However, no killer amps had the volume control first. The only ones I can ever remember that sounded any good were certain old Flotatone amps that were made for accordion, made in Milwaukee, I believe. But in general, no great amps have the volume control first. And we've talked about that. It's basically replicating the volume control on the guitar. It's just at the other end of the guitar cord. There's no gain to it. So anything that knob does is a cut. It doesn't increase anything. It only lowers it. And we don't want that. So there are a lot of those in Jack Darr because there's a lot of super budget amps, Little Silvertones and Dan Electros especially. And I do think it was a cost-cutting thing. Remember, they didn't want the kid to blow up the junk speaker that they put in there. So a lot of amps, Gibson Falcons, were purposely made to just not do anything much. Right? Okay. So Junior couldn't get too loud. So there's no reason for a passive volume control on a guitar amp that the guitar sees first before it goes to a tube. There's really no need for it. And there's only one or two decent sounding amps that ever had that.
All right.
Yeah, how's that?
What a packed episode. We had one of the world's great guitarists up front. We got some hot sauce recommendations. We know how to use those holiday spices now. Got some super obscure amps diagnosed, which is par for the course. And yeah,
guest was great.
Nels has already texted me and said he will return. So, folks, if you have questions for Nels Cline that are a little more precise than what we just talked about, lay them on us. Podcast at fretboardjournal.com. Go to grezguitars.com and see what Barry is up to. That Grez Mendocino, one of the great guitars of the modern era. Amplified Parts, your one-stop shop for amplifier parts. We do have a Patreon page, which you should go to, and we do have a private Facebook group called A Rustic Kegger in the Woods, which is now getting close to 1,000 members, so you can geek out. It's one of the only reasons I log on to Facebook anymore, is that group. It's a cool little group of people. So
I've been getting a lot of requests for shirts.
I know. We are going to have shirts.
Cameron at the silk shop.
Cameron is on it. I'm on it. It's mostly me being the bottleneck because I'm a perfectionist about this stuff. But yeah, we will have shirts and merch very shortly. And keep the Apple podcast reviews coming. Share the podcast with friends. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
I'll be here for you. Thanks to everyone for being so understanding when it takes so long for me to get something done. Doing my best. And I'll be back.